I've previously mentioned that Keyshot deserves a separate lesson, that is for sure. So this chapter is going to be mostly a collection of notes, if you will, like little tips and tricks that I usually resort to when I'm importing and texturing and rendering. And let's start with talking about the difference between importing different file formats. We're gonna start with the rifle ZBrush version that we did. So this is triangulated poly, and the only settings that you have is location and size. You don't have anything else. So if it's not separated in ZBrush in terms of separate objects, it's very unlikely that it's going to be coming through as individual pieces. So it will come in as one piece. Obviously, the benefits loads really fast, and it looks good, but not great. Here's where the problems start. The normals. You can see that not everything is smooth. ZBrush is clearly showing, or the ZBrush version is clearly showing some blemishes, but there is a trick to fix that. It not only works for models that you modeled in Fusion and then brought through ZBrush to here, but also just on regular ZBrush models. What you need to do is right-click, edit geometry. It's gonna rebuild the mesh, or at least like calculate it. And what you need to do is click Edit Normals, Next, and in the minimum edge angle, just put in 20. That usually works for hard surface, just from my experience. And then just click Calculate Vertex Normals. It's going to take a little bit. So if you're bringing individual meshes, you will have to do it one by one, or just select all of them in that window. But of course, it's easier to rebuild those when you have like individual problems. It doesn't have to rebuild everything. And before I confirm, like this is where it was showing. On all the rounded details, you can see this faceting really ugly, and you wouldn't want to be rendering with that. Like these are the problem areas. But once this has already calculated, so you just need to confirm it, click Done. Boom. It smooths everything out. No more faceting. So working through ZBrush is actually pretty efficient. You can unwrap in ZBrush. You can texture this, and you can bring the textures using UVs through ZBrush. Super convenient, especially for hard surface that is so hard to unwrap. Now let's take a look at a different file format and how exactly it's different. I'm going to take IGES. So we have different options here. What matters is you usually want to say keep individual parts, which means that all individual meshes that are not a single mesh will come through as separate objects. You don't have to separate materials by part. You can say retain materials, it doesn't really matter. What matters here is the tessellation quality, but I'm going to talk about this in a second. I wanted to say that even though it comes from Fusion 360, it's not NURBS data. We are exporting that as step, and in my understanding, Fusion makes a difference, makes a distinction between NURBS and BREP, which is body representation. So this comes in as BREP, not NURBS. There is no point in checking this. But what is important is tessellation. Let's take a look at what happens when you bring it at 0. Again, it's basically going through the mesh and calculating normals as well, because it comes into Keyshot as a mesh. It was really tiny. but let's just apply the same material everywhere. Which one is it? This one. And you saw that it came in with different materials. It's because the materials were assigned in Fusion, and that saves. So a lot of times it can save you some time if it's easier to assign as you're working, and they will come through, and it'll be a lot faster. But take a look. So this ugly faceting is happening when you, even when it's a BREP, when it's a CAD file, it comes in with a lot of faceting like this, just really ugly. Look at the thread. It's horrible. So what you want to do is, let's delete this one. Let's actually delete both. No, okay. And let's bring the same step file, CAD file, with a tessellation at 1. I mean, we can even do a little, anything over 0.5 will do the trick. So with huge models, with huge CAD files, obviously the tessellation calculating is going to take a lot of time. So you don't always have that. I would say the absolute minimum would be 0.5. And then from there you can adjust it. Also, it's good to know that some of the surfaces that are extremely tricky, like super organic, you might have problems with them coming through. So for that, you would just run it through ZBrush, turn it into a mesh, turn it into poly, and then apply the calculating normals trick. So some of it needs adjustment, but all that matters at the end is that you have all your meshes in. Again, the scale is a little off. Again, we're going to reassign the materials real quick. And you can see that now with tessellation at 1, the thread looks correct. No more ugly faceting. All the curved areas are perfect. No matter how much you zoom in them, they are impeccable. So now the formats that I import are either OBJ or STEP or IGES. I don't really import in any other formats, so that should be sufficient to get your models out of Fusion in here. I've already spent time developing the shaders and texturing and playing with different maps here. So I'm just gonna pause real quick, reload the scene with a fully textured gun, and we're gonna talk about the breakdown.